graduated in 1949 and went to Central College in McPherson, Kansas for 1 year, which gave me enough to start teaching. And I got this school out south of Lenore where I started school. And it had been rebuilt by then, but it was still, you had to bring in your own water and, of course, bathroom facilities was just the old outhouse, and you had to start the fire every morning to get the room nice and warm, and I did that for 4 years. And then after that, and every summer I was going to summer school because to try to get my degree eventually. And then we moved to Almena, and I taught that school out there north of Almena for 1 year. And I drove to school. Bill was able to get a job at the grocery store there in that town. And so that's what we did till I was out 8 months later when the school was closed. Then we moved to Almena, and a house just a block from his parents. Mm-hmm. And we lived there 1 year.
Yeah, the first year I farmed until the wheat was drilled and the corn was picked and the milo was cut because I ran the combines and everything. My dad didn't like to do that, and I did. And so as soon as all the crops were in, then is when I got a job at the grocery store and stayed in Lenore then, which was the town that she grew up in. And then as soon as farming started, which was in mid-April, then I didn't work at the grocery store anymore. And I drove back and forth which was 35 miles, until her school was out, which was, the schools then were 8 months, 8-month schools. Mm-hmm. And so by the 1st of May, she was out anyway. And so then we moved to Almena, and I farmed through that summer.
I started teaching on 1 year of college, 30 hours. And from that time on, it was summer school every summer until I got my bachelor's, which was way after we got married. And then my master's, when he got his master's, I lacked 3 hours. They wouldn't let me finish that year. So I had to go back the next summer to get my master's finished then.
What was happening is she had saved money and we were using that money to pay farming expenses because we had the situation was that I would get half of the money from the crops, but I had to pay half of the expenses, but I didn't have any money. And so that caused a problem. And I thought, this is crazy. We're using her money to support my occupation. And so he didn't see that at all. And, but we did it anyway, and it was a great move. Great move.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. When we moved to Almena, because after I finished teaching that year in south of Lenora, we moved to Almena because he was still farming some with his dad. In fact, that was the arrangement, that he was going to farm with his dad. I taught school, and then Patty was born, and so I didn't plan to teach that fall. But anyway, that didn't happen either, because a lady out north of Almena had an aneurysm, and she was going to be gone for a little while. So I went out to take the school. Well, you know what happened. She wasn't ever able to come back, and I taught that year too. Then this when we moved to Emporia, and I was able to get, that was my last country school out that I taught, and I had 22 students, grades 1 through 8. I had 4 8th graders, all larger than me that year. And so I've taught everything from kindergarten to 8th grade. And then when we moved to Lincoln, I didn't teach that year because that was the year Mickey was born in October. But then the following year, then I went into first grade there, and I taught there for 5 years before we moved to Colorado. And I taught in Whitefield for 29 years. So I had a total of 40 years of teaching when I retired. And then I subbed for 2 or 3 years after that, until Bill kept saying, I'm so tired of that phone ringing at 5 a.m. So I just resigned from subbing, and they were very upset when I resigned, but I'd had enough. That was a lot. But I really enjoyed my teaching years. And then out here, in the 29 years, I taught first grade for 3 years, and then I went into kindergarten, and that's where I ended up. I love kindergarten very much. It was just a very enjoyable time. And we went to Emporia, Kansas State Teachers College at that time, and there was a school vacancy out south of Emporia, and I went out there to interview with that school, and the guy that was on the school board, he says, as soon as I have my cake, I'll interview you. So we sat and waited while he poured milk over his cake and ate his cake. And he interviewed me, and I signed the contract to teach there. So we were going to have that much money coming in. And then, I don't know, when did you get your job?
First place I went was called Thomas Truck Terminal, which they handled all of the freight that came into Emporia. Emporia is right in the middle of Kansas City and Wichita. Okay. And so they handled all of the freight, and they also had a franchise of United Van Lines. And so I applied for a job, and they said, well, the only thing that we have open for you is at night. You can work all night, or you can work half of a night and every night, or all night every other night. And so and I did both. But I was really more fortunate than a lot of the people, because I'd grown up on a farm and there wasn't really anything that I couldn't do. And then we had, there were several, Hallmark Cards was one of the biggest places that they have. They had a battery factory and a meat factory and a glass factory, and you had to take trailers, semi-trailers, and spot them for them in the morning, early in the morning, and then you had to pick them up at night. And I could do that. I could spot a trailer and put it within 6 inches of the walls. And most people couldn't do that because they didn't have that kind of experience. So I had a job all the time when I was there. And I was able to work it out to spot the trailers in the morning and then go to class, and then pick them up at night and then work maybe. I worked either half of a night, which was 5 hours, or I worked all night, which was 10 hours. So.
And Patty was the baby, and we had a babysitter for her, and I would pick her up after, when I returned from school each night. One night, and of course he slept in the daytime, but after classes he would go to sleep. And one night when we came in, there was a note on the bed that says, Patty, you little knucklehead, don't wake me up. Because that was the first thing she would do. Because we had this little basement that we lived in. Well, we had the whole basement, and it was basically one room with a real small kitchen. So your bed was in one end, your table was in the other end. And she would just head for that bed the minute she came through that door of a night.
Jump right on top of me.
Yeah.
When we went to Lincoln, Kansas, we had nothing. And so I went to the store, because we didn't have, we needed a washing machine, and I probably didn't have a dryer, but we needed a table and chairs, and we need some of that stuff. And so I went to a furniture store, And the couple was an older couple that owned it. And I told them, I said, you know, we make $3,300 a year, and that's it. That's all we made then. And we had college expenses, we had car expenses, and so I said, you know, we need some things, but I don't know how we can pay for it. And so she asked me, you know, what I did, and I said, well, I'm a teacher. And she asked me if I went to church, and I said, well, we don't have a church. Because of her, we went to church in Emporia. And so anyway, she said, well, why don't you just go through and you pick out everything that you want, that you need. And so there were like a bed, beds and for kids, and a table and chairs, and another chair, and just what we absolutely had to have. And I said, well, this is what I want, but I can't. There's no way I can't pay for it. And she said, well, I think you can. She said, can you afford $10 a month? And I had to look at that and said, well, yeah, we can come up with $10 a month. And so I got all that stuff, got all that for $10 a month. Then she asked me, do you go to church anywhere? And I said, well, we don't have one. And she said, would you come to the Methodist church, visit it? And I thought, I don't really want to do that, but I owe her this, you know. So we went, and because I was a teacher, I had a lot of influence, automatic. Teachers did. They were way up here. And so I had a good music background. And so something happened to their choir director, and so we were going to church, and we were going every Sunday, and so I decided to sing in the choir. They'd asked me to, so I did. And then something happened to the teacher, to the music director, and so they said, Bill, you have, or actually they called me Mr. Pogue all the time, but anyway, they said, you know, you have education and you have music background, you're the best one. You have more experience and you're more able to lead the choir than anyone else. Would you do it? And I said, oh, yeah, well, I could do it. You know, I could read music and everything, you know, because I had taken solos to state and did well on them and everything. And so I had a music background. So I did. And then our pastor was kind of elderly, but he was okay, but he had a car wreck. Like it was in like 6 months after we started going to the church, he had a car wreck. And he couldn't, he was in the hospital. Matter of fact, he never did return. And they didn't have much money, and it was a Methodist church, and so they couldn't get an appointment until the next, whenever it was, that day was spring, I think. So they asked me if I would lead and be responsible for the sermons, because I had an education and no one else did. So they had what they call a district superintendent, and they said the district superintendent will work with you. So I took that on, and that's how I got started involved in the church. I know one time our family came, and Lonnie, my brother, said, because as I was giving the sermon that day, and they had in the back of the hymnal then and some other books, they had basically sermons built out. So all I had to do was read it and stand up. It was no problem for me to do that. And I know my brother was there one time, and he says, Bill, you sure had a lot of stats. He said, I don't know where you got all those stats. Well, I was just using what I could use, on that. And so Anyway, then they hired a pastor, and they became our very, very close friends. And we played bridge together and cards and a lot. And so that was my involvement. It just went from there and grew.
And we made it. It was kind of tough, but we would buy $30 gift certificates that we would use for groceries for the month. But we were always in arrears. We would get that certificate and pay the one that we'd got before. And then we were able to pay $30. So we made it through that first year, and then I took a job there. I was able to teach first grade there the next year. So it wasn't tough, other than always in arrears on that $30 certificate. Now you wouldn't get very much for $30 in this day and age, but back then you could get quite a few groceries at that time.
You can do a lot of different things as long as you use the word balance, and that's the key. Church and family are the two leading ones. Job, I loved an education because I taught history, and then went right into counseling and then into administration. Those were all totally different areas, and I just progressed from one to the other to the next one, which kept me interested. I didn't want to just be an educator. I wanted to do something else that put me out in the community away from teachers. And so I chose real estate. And so we started buying rentals early on. And of course you could buy them very cheap, and I always had another job so that we could take that money and put into rentals. And we just started building up, and then I got my license, and actually a partner and me owned a real estate company, Century 21, for I think 3 years. My favorite thing were to work with young peoples with the first house. And I probably sold 30 of those to young people, and help them get the finance, help them plan a budget so that they wouldn't lose the house, and get them into a house that they could afford. That was my favorite part of real estate. And then when I retired when I had 30 years in, I decided to retire and go into real estate full time. And that's what I managed one of the projects at Trinidad, putting in roads and power and phone and stuff like that. I learned through that process that you don't have to have everything work. And my philosophy is that in the investments and things that we do, if I could get 70% right, that we'd be fine. And that's just about the way it works out. But you've got to be able to take a risk on that other 30%. And if it doesn't work out, just get over it and go on. As I look back and everything, it just wonders how God works. Because what happened, that was very unpredictable, and no reason it could have happened the way it was, except that was God's plan.